there. Okay, so the recording started now. So thanks everyone for coming to this talk. This is part of the Text Analytics Seminar series that's been co-hosted by the Centre for Corpus Approaches to Social Science at Lancaster and the Sydney Corpus Lab at the University of Sydney. This is actually the final talk in this mini-series. We've had 3, but they've all been well attended, so that's fantastic. And our speaker today, last but by no means least, is my colleague from Lancaster, Isobelle Clarke. So Izzy, whenever you're ready, do you want to start sharing your slides and we can make a start?
So hi everyone, today I'm going to be talking about how keyword co-occurrence analysis can be used to track the discourses of HPV vaccination on Twitter over time. Now, this is a project that I've been conducting with some of the questioning vaccination discourse teams, specifically Professor Eleanor Semino, Dr Sophia Demjen, Dr Tara Montgomery Patel, and Will Dance as well. And if you'd like to find out more on their project that they're looking at, you can visit that webpage there. Now, for those of you that don't know, human papillomavirus is a very common group of viruses which are very easy to catch. You can get them from any kind of skin-to-skin contact of the genital area, vaginal, anal, oral sex, or sharing sex toys. And while many types of HPV don't cause any problems, there are some types which can cause genital warts or cancer. And these are called high-risk HPV types. And there are 14 known high-risk HPV types, 2 of which are HPV 16 and HPV 18. And these are responsible for most HPV-related cancers, including cervical, vulval, anal, throat and neck cancers. Now, in the 1970s and 80s, there was a German virologist called Harald Zerhausen, and at the time, it was just a theory that HPV caused cancer, but Harald Zerhausen found HPV strains in cervical cancer tumours, and this confirmed the theory that HPV most likely caused cervical cancer. And so in 1986, Zerhausen proposed the idea of a vaccine for cancer prevention, but the pharmaceutical companies rejected it as they didn't feel that it was profitable. But nevertheless, by 1990, professors from the University of Queensland in Australia began to synthesise particles that mimicked HPV. And by 1991, these were used to make a vaccine. And after 7 years of design and testing, the first human trials for the vaccine, named Gardasil, were completed. And this vaccine prevented 4 high-risk types, HPV 6, 11, 16 and 18. And this would target over 70% of cervical cancer cases. And in 2006, following extensive clinical trials, which found the vaccine to provide almost 100% protection against HPV 16 and 18, the vaccine was approved for use by Australia and the USA. And by, have I just gone off my thing? No, sorry. And by, sorry, I just clicked off. And by 2007, the vaccine was approved in 80 different countries. Now, originally, the vaccine was just administered to young girls, but over time, different age and sex groups have been made eligible to get the vaccine. Now, studies have shown that the vaccine has reduced rates of genital warts and HPV-related cancers, but despite the efficacy of it, there have been periods where vaccine uptake has been particularly low. And there have been various studies looking at hesitancy around HPV vaccine, and they've attributed it to a variety of different factors, including the efficacy concerns and reports of vaccine harms, particularly for Gardasil, which is a brand of the HPV vaccine, and the perceived link between HPV infection and sexual activity, where parents often delay vaccination if they see that it's not yet relevant for their own children, i.e. they might think that their children aren't sexually active, or if they fear that it will encourage them to become sexually active. So these are kind of the known, perhaps hesitant reasons for why people are hesitant. So given these kind of periods of low uptake and hesitancy, we are interested to see how HPV vaccination is discussed, what are the common repertoires and how has this changed over time. Are there any changes that align with periods of low uptake? And how do people discuss the efficacy of the vaccine? Now, over time, as we know, more and more people have migrated towards social media for their social lives, and social media has really become a platform for researchers to understand social and health trends. Examining social media to detect health trends as well as to communicate important information is a growing area of research in public health. For example, Twitter has been used to provide information on national level health and behaviour. It's also been used to monitor, detect and forecast public health conditions. It's been used for raising awareness and disseminating public health and information, and it's used to understand public opinion on public health issues as well. Now, understanding the content and implications of conversations that form around HPV vaccination on social media can help health organisations and health-focused Twitter users in creating a meaningful exchange of ideas and in having a significant impact on vaccine uptake. And so it's really against this backdrop that we situate our aims for this research. Specifically, we wanted to understand how HPV vaccination is discussed on Twitter over time. And we wanted to know what the common discourses and repertoires of tweets discussing the HPV vaccination are and how these change over time. Now, in order to do this, we firstly needed to collect our corpus. So using the Twitter's academic API, which allowed researchers to collect 10 million tweets a month, we extracted tweets from 2008 up until the end of 2022 that included either HPV or human papillomavirus written out alongside VAC with an asterisk or VAX with an asterisk to get different variations of the form of the word. We then removed duplicates as the repetition of word forms can kind of skew frequency counts. And after deduplication, we had a total of 535,517 tweets, which totaled just over 15 million word tokens. Now, in order to track the discourses of HPV vaccination over time, we selected the methodological technique called keyword co-occurrence analysis. Now, keyword co-occurrence analysis is an approach aimed at identifying patterns of co-occurring keywords across a corpus of texts, where keywords are words that occur with a higher frequency when compared with a reference corpus. Now, as many of us know, keyword tools can point analysts towards keywords, which in turn allow access to discourses associated with some object of study. However, one challenge is in the prizing apart of the discourses in the list of the keywords, as the keywords may all be associated with the discourses present in the corpus. Now, different techniques have been developed for this task, such as by grouping keywords together into semantic or thematic categories, and that can be done by closely reading the keywords in the context, as well as through collocation analysis or using different kinds of metadata and things. But all approaches have limitations, and the creation of meaningful categories and the assignment of keywords to those categories often involves some element of compromise, especially as keywords may contribute to more than one discourse. And determining where this happens is often a matter for the analyst. And as corpora get larger, and we often have to compromise on the number of occurrences or concordance lines that we look at. And as a result, there's some compromise that happens, and we might not always attribute a keyword to multiple semantic or thematic categories. Now, another major challenge of standard keyword tools is the focus on presence over absence. Here, as Schroeter and Taylor have emphasised, absence can be just as meaningful as presence, and as Partington notes, patterns of presence and absence may meaningfully interact. And so it's against this backdrop of limitations that I came up with a solution called keyword co-occurrence analysis, which aims to group keywords, the presence or absence of keywords, according to how they co-occur with each other in the text of a corpus. In other words, rather than manually group keywords into thematic or semantic groups, which can lead to different elements of compromise, keywords are grouped statistically based on their frequent co-occurrence in the text of the corpus. Now, keyword co-occurrence analysis is grounded in two notions. The first is the notion of linguistic co-occurrence, which suggests that frequent patterns of co-occurring linguistic features tend to reveal an underlying communicative function. Now, this notion informs other methodologies like multidimensional analysis, but unlike multidimensional analysis, rather than identify patterns of co-occurring grammatical features, we wanted to identify patterns of co-occurring keywords. And so myself, Tony McHenry and Gavin Brooks hypothesised, based on the notion of linguistic co-occurrence and the notion that keywords allow access to discourses, that frequent patterns of co-occurring keywords may reveal common representations or discourses of some object of study. And it did. So to run the keyword co-occurrence analysis, first of all, you need to compute a keyword list, and this is done through a regular keyword analysis. Now, in order to compute a keyword list for our study investigating HPV vaccination on Twitter, we needed to compare our HPV vaccine Twitter corpus to a reference corpus. And so we decided to collect a reference Twitter corpus, and we did this by using the academic API. We collected approximately 5,000 random tweets from every week for each year, posted from 2008 up to the end of 2022. So for each year, 52 weeks in a year, each of those 52 weeks, we collected a random approximately 5,000 tweets. And so in total, our reference corpus contains nearly 3.5 million tweets, comprising 49 million word tokens. Now, with this reference corpus, we computed our keywords by comparing the frequencies of words in our target HPV vaccination corpus with the frequencies of the words in the reference Twitter corpus using Hardy's log ratio statistic. In particular, we retained keywords that had a log ratio of 0.5 or more, and this indicates that the keywords occur more than 1.4 times in the target corpus than the reference corpus. We then reduced this list of keywords further, retaining only those that were dispersed in more than 1% of the tweets in the HPV Twitter corpus. And this is because keyword co-occurrence analysis requires infrequent features to be removed. So in essence, this is our dispersion criteria. So each of these keywords, that we were left with 126 keywords, and each of these occurred in more than 1.4 times in the reference corpus and the reference corpus, and they occurred in at least 1% of the tweets in our target corpus. Now, having retrieved our keyword list, each text was then analysed for the presence or absence of the keywords, and we recorded this in a data matrix like this. So this is what our categorical data matrix looks like. Each tweet is a row in the table, and each column is a keyword, and each cell in the row represents if that keyword is present or absent in the tweet. The next step of the analysis involves subjecting this data matrix to multiple correspondence analysis, which is a multivariate statistical technique which is used to reveal dimensions consisting of the most dominant patterns of co-occurring keywords across the corpus of texts. So I'm just going to slow this down a little bit, give you a kind of a detail into what multiple correspondence analysis is. So multiple correspondence analysis is a geometric data analytical method which enables the identification and visualization of the most dominant relationships between 3 or more categorical variables in a low dimensional space. MCA is the dimension reduction method, and dimension reduction is a process of reducing the number of variables in a data set while retaining as much information as possible. It's used to explain the variation found in a data set in a fewer number of dimensions than there are the number of variables. And dimension reduction is often used to make it easier to visualize data by identifying relationships between those variables. Now, in general, MCA has been used to analyse questionnaire or survey data, and this is because it's able to identify a group of individuals who have answered similarly to the questions, as well as the associations between the answers of questions. So what answers are selected together most often, and what answers are rarely selected together. And the approach was popularised by Jean-Paul Benzacri, who used it to analyse sociological data from questionnaires. Now, this is just an example of a study that uses multiple correspondence analysis on a questionnaire, and they're investigating sexual fantasies across different genders and sexual orientations in young adults. And multiple correspondence analysis is used to visualize the relationships between the people, so their respondents, and their responses to the questions in terms of distance. And it produces two clouds of points like this, where the points on one cloud, so on the left-hand side, represent the people, and the points on the right-hand side are the responses to the questions. So you'll be able to see _Y and _N on the responses, and yeah, that stands for yes or no. So a very kind of yes/no questionnaire. Answers here. And the points representing people are closer together in the space if they give the same responses to the questions, whereas points representing responses to the questions are closer together if they are distributed similarly across the people. So in other words, if many people select the same responses, then those responses are closer together in the space. And so what these kind of plots show, these are just two dimensions from the cloud of points. So a cloud is a high dimensional cloud, and then they extract dimensions from them. So this is just two dimensions plotted against each other. And these are kind of the two most dominant patterns in the corpus. And so if you just look at these plots, you kind of will look to them both. If we're looking at the people, we can see those in red are heterosexual women. They are on the left-hand side, and so then we would look to the variables and look at the left-hand side as well and see what those variables are. So what are they most associated with? And so what we can see is that women in this particular study, heterosexual women, tended to not have many sexual fantasies, or at least those that were included in the questionnaire. And one of their main findings of this particular study is that they found that bisexual men and homosexual men, which are those in purple and blue, they were very similar. So there's much overlap between them, which you can see in the confidence interval, those circles around it. There's much overlap between them, and so this indicates that they share a lot of the same sexual fantasies. So multiple correspondence analysis shows these relationships between them, and it reveals dimensions reflecting the most common patterns of variation in the data set. And the patterns of variation are revealed by assigning each category of a variable and each individual a positive or negative coordinate and a value indicating its contribution to the dimension. So for the next dimension, the same text and the same category of a keyword will be assigned a different coordinate and a contribution. And coordinates reflect the nature of the association between the categories of variables in terms of proximity, where categories of variables distributed in similar ways in the individuals have coordinates closer to each other on the same side of the origin, and categories of variables not distributed in similar ways are positioned on opposite sides of the origin. So one will have a positive coordinate and the other one will have a negative coordinate. So just looking at this plot from the sexual fantasy study, when the fantasies are closer together, then this means that they are selected together often by people, whereas when they are in opposite quadrants, this indicates that they're rarely selected together by lots of people. So for instance, people who fantasize about sleeping with a transsexual rarely or never fantasize about sleeping with a prostitute, which is on the opposite side of the quadrants. Now, contributions show which categories of variables are the most important contributors to the dimensions. Contributions do not have polarity, and so the coordinates of the variables need to be interpreted in conjunction with their contributions. Specifically, the categories of variables with strong contributions and positive coordinates are interpreted in opposition to the categories of variables with strong contributions and negative coordinates. And in line with LaRue and Brunet, we just are mainly interested in the categories of variables that contribute above the average contribution, as these represent the most distinguishing patterns of variation. So just looking at this plot again, each of the categories of the fantasies are colour-coded according to their contribution. So those that contribute the most to a dimension are those that distinguish the individuals most clearly. So these are the ones that we're interested in when we're looking to interpret a dimension. So for dimension number 2, which is going up from top to bottom, we will kind of look at the ones that are in from yellow to red. They're the ones that we will be interested in. Now, multiple correspondence analysis reveals the associations between the variables and the associations between the individuals. And the general assumption is that these associations are not random, but rather there's an underlying reason for them. and it's the task of the analyst to interpret why the variables co-occur and co-vary. So with the sexual fantasy study, the gender and the sexual orientation was used to explain why those sexual fantasies co-occurred and co-varied. Now, when multiple correspondence analysis is applied to the data matrix representing the presence or absence of keywords in the text of a corpus, multiple correspondence analysis produces a series of dimensions representing the most common patterns of co-occurring keywords across the corpus of text. And so using these results, it's our task to interpret why these keywords co-occur. Now, interpreting and labelling dimensions in any dimension reduction method is particularly difficult, especially in the context of multidimensional analysis and keyword co-occurrence analysis, where the variables are linguistic features and the goal is to select a short descriptive label that captures the crux of the dimension and the opposition of a large number of features. And this process is amplified with the analysis of discourse, because discourses are subjective and because of the shifted nature of discourse as well. And there's no really one-to-one relationship between a dimension and a discourse. A single dimension can comprise several simultaneous discourses, and similar discourses can crop up in different dimensions. And so this led us to question what is actually revealed in the co-occurrence of keywords and what could be revealed in the co-occurrence of keywords in our HPV vaccine Twitter corpus. So consequently, we looked to literature on keywords, Twitter, as well as other studies, analysing the co-occurrence of lexical variables in order to kind of form an analytical framework to guide us in the interpretation of the dimensions. Now, previous research has shown that keywords can point to the text aboutness or topic. Keywords can also be indicators of style, such as informal or informal keywords. And so patterns of co-occurring keywords may point to a shared topic, aboutness and or style across the texts. My own research looking at conducting a multidimensional analysis of English tweets, this revealed that tweets vary along 4 continuums of functional variation. And so whilst my research was looking at the co-occurrence of grammatical features, it did reveal that Twitter is used for a variety of different communicative functions. And so this could, in essence, be revealed in patterns of co-occurring keywords. And so so this was important to perhaps consider as well. There's also a growing body of research that's been using multidimensional analysis to analyse lexical features such as word forms, lemmas, engrams and collocations. And the goals of these analyses have been used to detect underlying constructs such as discourses, language ideologies, representations, communicative functions and registers. Also, in an analysis I conducted with Tony McHenry and Gavin Brooks, we revealed that dimensions of co-occurring keywords also pointed to sub-register and discourse, and that was looking at a corpus of UK press articles mentioning Islam. So drawing on this research, we developed this analytical framework grid to assist our analysis of the dimensions of co-occurring keywords. Now, each dimension we analysed for each construct in the grid. They might not have been relevant, but we wanted to make sure that we approached each dimension in exactly the same way. And we included a further layer of interpretation, which is vaccine attitude. And this is because, given that vaccination is a very polarising topic, we thought that it might be possible that certain co-occurrence patterns may be more associated with particular attitudes around vaccines. And so in addition to assessing the patterns of co-occurring keywords for discourse, topic, aboutness, register, communicative function and style, we also assessed if certain patterns of co-occurring keywords are also associated with being pro, anti or hesitant vaccination. So we analysed each dimension for each construct in the grid, and we did this by observing the keywords in the context of the text most associated with the dimension. We also read the text that were the full tweets that were most associated with the dimension, and we produced a short descriptive label which captures the opposition between the keywords in the text on each side of the dimension. We then attempted to falsify the label by looking at less strongly associated texts to see if the label upholds. And if the label is falsified, then we will refine the label and we'll repeat steps 3 to 5 until we're happy with the label that we've decided. Now, each dimension was analysed by 2 analysts independently, and those 2 analysts then came together with their grids, compared notes and labels, and a final label was eventually agreed. So to illustrate, this is just a snippet of what the multiple correspondence analysis reveals. I couldn't include everything because we've got so many tweets, but you have a list of keywords that contribute strongly to the dimension, and those with positive coordinates are at the top and those with negative coordinates are at the bottom, although you can't see the negative ones. Then each tweet in the corpus is assigned a positive or negative coordinate, and a value indicating its contribution as well. I haven't actually included the contribution on this. And as I said, we looked at how the keywords are used in the tweets. Now, we interpreted the keywords associated with positive dimension 1 as used in the tweets to provide the lowdown on the HPV vaccine. There were keywords used to indicate the common causes and consequences of HPV, i.e. many tweets noted that it was the most common sexually transmitted infection, that HPV can cause genital warts and various types of cancer, especially cervical cancer. There are also keywords used to emphasise that the HPV vaccine and regular screenings can protect against and prevent most consequences of the virus. Many of the tweets included the keywords types, cases and strains to specify that there are different types of HPV, especially some which are high risk and can cause different types of cancer, and that the vaccine can protect against some of those strains. Some of the keywords were used to mark who is eligible to receive the vaccine and when, and the keywords learn and more often co-occurred in tweets, such as the top two here, and they direct readers to educate themselves on the benefits of the vaccine. So learn more and then a link, for instance. There are also keywords used to promote the capacity of HPV vaccine explicitly. For example, the keyword awareness often co-occurred as part of Cervical Cancer Awareness Month or HPV awareness campaigns. So overall, as you might be able to see, these tweets on the positive side were informationally dense. There's lots of information packed into these tweets, especially on the HPV vaccine, and they include various information such as what it is, who it's eligible to, who can get it, when you can get it, where you can find out more information on it. So just a huge amount of information packed in to such a small amount of space. Now, by contrast, there are only 3 keywords that are strongly associated with negative dimension 1, and these are the absences of cervical cancer and of. Many studies employing keyword co-occurrence analysis have observed that the first dimension, especially the ones that I've done, the first dimension often opposes the presence of keywords on the positive side with the absence of keywords on the negative side. And as a result, we find that dimension 1 is strongly correlated with text length. And this is because the approach analyses the presence or absence of keywords and does not control for the length of the text by analysing the normalised rates of occurrence of keywords. And one of the strongest influences on the presence of keywords is the length of the text. So the fewer words a text has, the more likely a keyword is going to be absent, and vice versa. The more words you have, the more likely a keyword will be present. So in our analysis, we correlated each tweet's dimension 1 coordinate to the length of the tweet in word tokens, and we found that there's only a moderate positive correlation to tweet length. And this means that longer tweets tend to be more associated with positive dimension 1. However, whereas shorter tweets tend to be more associated with negative dimension 1. However, the correlation is not very strong. It's moderate, suggesting that tweet length is not the whole story of dimension 1. And so as a result, we analysed the tweets most associated with negative dimension 1. And this revealed that the tweets most associated with negative dimension 1 are often sharing the latest news on the HPV vaccine, including news on vaccination rates, vaccine safety, and perceptions of side effects. For instance, the first example here, if you can read it there, it's sharing a news story headline on HPV vaccination rates amongst teens, and then it's accompanied by a warning suggesting that the vaccine is too new and that the side effects of it are unknown. Many tweets associated with negative dimension 1 often mention side effects of the HPV vaccine. Some are functioning as warnings, suggesting that the vaccine is unsafe, as in the first 2 examples that we've got here. But then there are also ones which are debunking such claims, as in the 3rd example. It says parents lack confidence in HPV vaccine safety despite no serious side effects. Now, unlike the tweets strongly associated with the positive side, the tweets associated with negative dimension 1 never mention cervical cancer and how the HPV vaccine can help to prevent it. Now, it's difficult to talk about the function of the absences of keywords, especially when there are no present keywords that are strongly associated with this side of the dimension to help us kind of understand what's going on. Instead, one way we can interpret the negative side of the dimension is to ask ourselves, why would tweets mentioning the HPV vaccine not mention cervical cancer? Why would tweets sharing and discussing news on the HPV vaccination rate, safety and perceptions of its side effects not discuss cervical cancer? And so it's through asking these questions that we can really begin to see an opposition between the keywords and the tweets associated with the positive side, with the keywords and tweets associated with the negative side. Specifically, that is that tweets providing the latest HPV news are going to focus on newsworthy topics, i.e. news values. And one news value, as many of us will know, is negativity. Bad news is more newsworthy. If it bleeds, it leads. And so tweets focusing on discussing the safety and side effects of the HPV vaccine, often in a negative way, as many of the tweets associated with the negative side of dimension 1 do, they're likely going to downplay and or omit the benefits of taking up the vaccine as a way to align with the negative presentation of the vaccine. And the same can be said for the positive side as well. Tweets focusing on discussing how the vaccine can help prevent HPV-related cancers, they're going to be more likely going to downplay and omit speaking of the potential side effects, so as to uphold the positive presentation of the vaccine. And given their positivity, these tweets are also less likely to be in the news register. As noted, many tweets associated with a negative dimension 1 are news headlines, which are renowned for their brevity. And the tweets, as I said, the tweets associated with positive dimension 1 are much more informationally dense and longer, reflecting public health messages on HPV. And so, in a way, the moderate positive correlation to tweet length also enriches our interpretations that we've got on the positive side being a lot more informationally dense public health messages, and on the negative side being much more about HPV news and providing the latest on the HPV vaccine. So that's kind of how we interpret a dimension. And then once we've interpreted our dimensions, we then want to track the discourses over time. Now, as I mentioned, each individual and each category of a variable is assigned by the multiple correspondence analysis a positive or negative coordinate for each dimension. So as you can see in this table, text 1 and text 2 have a dimension coordinate and contribution for dimension 1, 2 and 3. Now, because of this, it's possible to track how discourses reflected in the dimensions vary over time. And we do this by plotting a 60-day moving average of all the tweets coordinates plotted in that time. So this is a plot of each tweet's dimension 1 coordinate. And essentially all the coordinates of all the tweets posted in the 60-day period are averaged, and this is plotted. And when the trend line rises to the positive side, this indicates that tweets are more dominated by the discourse on the positive side, whereas when the trend line troughs to the negative side, the discourse on the negative side dominates in the tweets. So it's possible to see the moderate correlation to text length in this plot, because the trend line moves quite clearly from the negative to the positive side of the dimension at the end of 2017 here. And for those of you that are Twitter users, or ex-users, I should say now, tweet length was increased in November 2017 from 140 characters to 280 characters. And so this peak in the trend line marks the point where tweets concerning HPV became much longer, with authors most likely making use of the additional space afforded by the technology. There are also notable peaks at the beginning of most years. Tweets posted at the start of each year with high positive dimension 1 coordinates are often describing or raising awareness of Cervical Cancer Awareness Month or HPV Awareness Day. The Cervical Cancer Awareness Month is in January, so right at the start of each year, and the HPV Awareness Day is in March, so kind of lead into these peaks. So yeah, these peaks kind of mark a strive for clear information on the HPV vaccine, including what it is, what it can do in order to raise awareness and promote its uptake. Now, the trend line is lowest in the middle of 2008. The tweets most associated with negative dimension 1 during this period often present newsworthy headlines on HPV vaccines, such as particular brands of the HPV vaccine being approved overseas, or schools refusing to give the vaccine, and alleged government cover-ups on the side effects of the vaccine, among many others. During 2008, the HPV vaccine was being rolled out in schools across many countries in the world, and so it was thus a really newsworthy event, and the figure really does reflect this. Finally, what we find on this plot is from the middle of 2015 to the end of 2017, what we can see is that there are barely any tweets associated with positive dimension 1. So there's like nothing bringing it up. We're quite a strong domination here of the negative side discourse. So does this trend line reflect a period of newsworthy HPV vaccine tweets, or does it perhaps reflect a period where little awareness of the HPV vaccine was being raised? From an examination of the tweets most associated with either side of the dimension, it's possible to say that there's a clear lack of tweets providing unambiguous information on HPV and the HPV vaccine from the end of 2015 up until the end of 2017. Now, according to the World Health Organization, vaccination uptake declined across several countries during this period for unknown reasons. Now, the lack of awareness raising tweets on the HPV vaccine may be a reason for this notable decline in vaccination uptake. Additionally, the sudden increase in tweets raising awareness of the HPV vaccine after this period may be a response to the decline in uptake rates, as more effort was kind of put in place to raise awareness of the vaccine. So these are what these kind of plots can show us. They provide so much more information than just looking at a dimension, the most strongly associated tweets. We can really track the discourse over time. So yeah, I think it's really good. Now, overall, we interpreted 9 dimensions. I'm not going to have time to talk through every one. I've just been able to talk through number 1 with you. It took a while. But I will be able, I'm going to go through dimension number 2 and dimension number 5, as I think these are really interesting ones. But we are going to be publishing on this hopefully soon, and I'll be presenting on this research for a while and presenting different dimensions. So make sure you tune in for those. So for dimension number 2, we interpreted it as opposing tweets on the positive side that discussed childhood vaccines with tweets on the negative side that provided HPV vaccine information. Now, tweets that discussed childhood vaccinations, they mention the HPV vaccine as just one of many other vaccines administered to children. In these tweets, the HPV vaccine is not necessarily the focus. Rather, the tweets are generally discussing and listing the numerous vaccines that children get, or they're pointing out the vaccines that numerous people will have had, including HPV. Some of these tweets draw comparisons between the COVID vaccine and other childhood vaccines to either demonstrate the power of vaccines, as in this first example here, where it's just saying it's helping protect my child and community against COVID, so it's a lot in support of them, or they emphasise that vaccines have been mandated in public schools, as in the second example, or they're used to criticise the COVID vaccine's efficacy or criticise behaviours surrounding COVID. The tweets on the negative side, however, provide HPV vaccine information, such as the impact of the vaccine on rates of genital warts and cervical cancer among women following vaccination. And many of the tweets are sharing news reports about studies on the HPV vaccine and largely function to communicate information on the HPV vaccine, often demonstrating its efficacy. Now, just plotting this dimension over time, what this shows is that tweets are largely associated with negative dimension 2 from the beginning of Twitter up until 2019, or from the beginning of this corpus. And then what we see come 2019, we have a rise to the positive side, and the sharpest rise is in early 2020, and the trend line peaks the highest in mid 2021. Now, these peaks and rises coincide with the discovery of COVID and the rollout of COVID-19 vaccines worldwide. This shows that there is a greater mention of other childhood vaccinations in addition to HPV in tweets associated with positive dimension 2 during this time. So, in other words, the discovery of COVID and the advent of COVID-19 vaccines led to increased discussions of other vaccinations as well, where HPV was just one of them. Moving on to dimension number 5, we interpreted it as opposing tweets on the positive side that discuss vaccine safety, with tweets on the negative side that discuss or provide HPV recommendations. Now, one of the most common aspects of vaccine safety discussed in the tweets is the side effects of vaccines. This discourse is used to express both pro and anti-vaccination sentiment, with the tweets in both camps including the keywords evidence and shows to corroborate the point being made. Now, with respect to the tweets conveying an anti-vaccination sentiment, the keywords are used to claim that the HPV vaccine, especially Gardasil, is not safe and has devastating side effects, some worse than those of cancer itself, which you can read in this first tweet. Some tweets also question the preventative effect of the HPV vaccine, stating that it only prevents a few strains of HPV and not all that cause cancer, as in this one. And I don't know, that's the wrong one. But yeah, so some tweets also question the preventative effect. No, interesting, when side effects are discussed in anti-vaccination tweets, the kinds of side effects that are in question remain unspecified and vague. There are a few exceptions to this, but it's generally, it causes serious side effects. They don't actually say what those serious side effects are. Some of the tweets also mention the safety of other vaccines. For example, there's some anti-vaccination sentiment and reasoning about the COVID vaccine in terms of other vaccines. These sometimes claim that information about the HPV vaccine side effects is not being made available to people by the authorities, and therefore there must be side effects of other vaccines that people don't know about. Other tweets compare the time it took Gardasil to be developed and the time it took for side effects of it to become known, with how quickly COVID has been developed and how little time has passed since they started being used. And this is often to imply that there are unknown side effects of the COVID vaccine and that they may arise in order to justify one's hesitancy. So this top tweet now, they said Gardasil was safe for HPV vaccine and since had been discovered to have tons of side effects, a vaccine that took years to develop. So no thanks to the COVID vaccine until way more is known about it. Thank you very much. Now, the pro-vaccination tweets that are associated with a positive side, they use the same keywords, but instead they argue that the HPV vaccine is safe and it has very few side effects. Research shows no evidence of severe side effects or that the HPV vaccine has had a good safety record and is effective at preventing cervical cancer. Often these tweets are responding to and counteracting the anti-vaccination tweets outlined above. The pro-vaccination tweets associated with positive dimension 5 also discuss COVID vaccines in terms of HPV. For instance, this bottom example here says, what vaccines do you know has ever had side effects after 3, 5 or 7 years? Whereas there are many examples of viruses with latent effects, HPV, cancer, HIV and AIDS. Who knows what a full-blown infection of COVID will bring you? So this is used to kind of show that we should have the vaccine in order to prevent the long-term risk effects of the virus, as with the HPV vaccine. So overall, tweets associated with positive dimension 5 are quite argumentative. They are largely interactive, often mentioning people at the beginning through the @mention sign. And this is true of both anti-vaccination tweets and the pro-vaccination tweets. Now, tweets associated with negative dimension 5, they recommend the HPV vaccination. Many tweets call on parents to get their children vaccinated, as in this top one, please vaccinate your kids against the human papillomavirus. These calls sometimes take the imperative form, but they're also phrased as information about recommendations from authorities. And there's an emphasis on getting children of both sexes vaccinated, preferably via the school programmes, and specifications about the age at which the vaccination is given and recommended, with caveats that it can also be administered later if missed at the ideal age. Whilst these tweets are calling on parents to vaccinate their children, they're not really directly interacting with specific Twitter users, as with many tweets associated with this side. Instead, they're much more informational. They're generally broadcasting their message and using hashtags to make their message a lot more visible. So just by tracking this dimension over time, we can see that there's very little change over time, perhaps suggesting a balance between these two discourses. But the most noticeable pattern is a preference for the positive side of the dimension in the early and final years of data collection. The early years coincided the introduction of the HPV vaccine for girls in both the US and the UK in 2008, and the final years coincide with the COVID-19 pandemic and the introduction of the COVID vaccine, with many tweets during this period discussing the safety and side effects of vaccines. There is a slight dip towards the negative side of dimension 5 between mid-2011 and mid-2013, and the tweets associated with this period tend to include discussions including about the boys on vaccination programme and indicating that they're eligible. And this is why the trend line is lowest at this particular point, because this is when they were finally eligible to have the vaccine, and it was rolled out in particular vaccination programmes in the UK. Interestingly, after this trough in 2012, there's a sharp peak where many tweets suddenly begin talking about the safety of the HPV vaccine. And these tweets are, if you look at these are often, if you look at the tweets most associated during this time, the tweets are all sharing a blog post from a website known to promote pseudoscience and conspiracy, and they're commenting on it, often saying like, look at this, oh my god, can you believe it, sort of thing. And the blog post is specifically discussing a call to take the HPV vaccine off the market from another website that's known to promote pseudoscience and conspiracy. So overall, this sharp peak represents a common pattern found across anti-science discourse, and a particular pattern that I found across my other research looking at anti-science, where new posts that are supporting an anti-scientific position, these are shared hundreds and hundreds of times by the anti-scientific community. And this has also been found in research investigating climate change denialists, where they find that virtually any claim uttered by a contrarian scientist, whether it be a finding that challenges anthropogenic climate change or the discovery of a weakness in a mainstream scientific's work or an allegation of suppression, it immediately zooms around the internet via the climate change blogosphere. So this sharp peak on this particular plot really does demonstrate that this happens not just within the climate change and anti-climate change blogosphere, but also within the anti-vaccination discourse. So just to conclude then, overall, keyword co-occurrence analysis has been used to uncover the most common discourses and repertoires of HPV vaccination on Twitter, and it's also been used to track these over time. Just out of these three dimensions that I've been able to present to you today, we found that there is a clear lack of information on the HPV vaccination during a period where there is low vaccination uptake. Additionally, we find that COVID has had a big influence on communication on the HPV vaccine on Twitter. In particular, now when the HPV vaccine is mentioned, it tends to be mentioned in passing, in addition with the COVID vaccine being the focus of many tweets, and the HPV vaccination is just mentioned in order to justify whether or not the individual will get the COVID vaccine, or to list a variety of vaccines to emphasise the power of vaccines. It's done by both pro and anti. Additionally, because of missed vaccines as a result of the pandemic, we see an increase in calls to parents to get their children vaccinated. And we found that vaccine safety is more dominant in tweets than vaccine recommendations during the initial rollout years of new vaccine. And we found that many repertoires are also used by those in favour and against the vaccines. So these findings have particular implications for health organisations, and they provide avenues for further research. For instance, given the alignment between a lack of information and low uptake rates, perhaps in order to keep uptake rates high, we need continuous clear information on what the vaccine is, what it does, prevents, and who it's for. An interesting thing to consider now is how influential is vaccine safety over vaccine recommendations during the time of rolling out vaccines. Perhaps for the future, when new vaccines are developed, we need to have more of a balance between vaccine safety and recommendations. Similarly, now we know that pro-vaccination and anti-vaccination tweets use similar repertoires. What is the effect of each side's arguments on the other? If I, as an anti-vaxxer, say to a pro-vaxxer that we need to save, this is in a different particular dimension, which I didn't get to discuss, but one of the discourses is save the children, and this is used by anti-vaxxers and pro-vaxxers. And if I say to them as an anti-vaxxer, we need to save the children by not giving them a vaccine because they can cause adverse side effects, what effect does this have? And vice versa, if I as a pro-vaxxer say to an anti-vaxxer that we need to save the children by giving them a vaccine that will protect against the virus that can cause cancer and genital warts, that does not cause any serious side effects, what effect will this have on them? And so these are all questions that I can't answer right now, but now we have an understanding of the most common repertoires, we can really begin to test such questions and assumptions. And so on that note, I will kindly end there. These are my references, and thank you very much for listening to what is a very long and dense presentation.
Okay, thank you. That's really interesting. I saw some like clapping